Hello and welcome. This is PressTV's news analysis, which we're going to discuss how severe the situation is in Bahrain. Economically, more banks are closing and moving to other financial centers. Politically, the opposition has rejected the so-called national dialogue and the latest gesture by the king, pardoning some protesters. That triggered more protests, especially when news broke out on the death of a 14-year-old boy. Combine all of these with hunger strikes by some of the country's best doctors and their children, with 200 political detainees joining in. We ask, how can Bahrain's king possibly survive this?
Protests against the UK-founded Al Khalifa regime have been continuing on a daily basis since mid-February, when the Bahraini Revolution began. The demonstrations took a new turn after the killing of a 14-year-old boy by the regime. Ali Jawad was struck on the head by a tear gas grenade fired by the Saudi-backed Bahraini forces during a protest rally. Ali's family plans to file a lawsuit with an international court against the Manama regime. There has been no let-up in the crackdown on dissent. The regime has not spared the Medical Society of Bahrain. A Bahraini physician who once worked at Suleymaniya Hospital has told PressTV that authorities have jailed 20 doctors for treating anti-regime protesters. Ibrahim Al-Aradi, who is now in Europe, said 12 of the physicians are on an open-ended hunger strike. 2 physicians, he says, have slipped into coma. The brutal crackdown to silence the protests in Bahrain is taking place right under the nose of the very West that is clamoring about the alleged rights violations in other parts of the world. Amnesty International has slammed Europe for turning a blind eye to the situation in the Persian Gulf shakedown. The US has also failed to even condemn the crackdown by the Al Khalifa regime, that along with the Saudi regime is a staunch ally of Washington and hosts the United States Navy's 5th Fleet.
Let me introduce our guest to get this news analysis rolling. Starting off with Saeed Shaabi in London. He's a Bahraini Freedom Movement. From Beirut, we have Nada Hashmi joining us. She's a political analyst. And from Manama, Nabeel Rajab, president of the Bahraini Center for Human Rights, joins us. Thank you all. Nabeel Rajab, first to you. About 12 doctors out of 47 who were detained. That includes some nurses. They've gone on hunger strikes, some in a coma because of it, with more detainees joining it. About 200 based on the latest reports, including opposition movement member like Abdul Jalil Al-Sangasi and prominent rights activist Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja. Give us your reaction to this, please, and any more explanations you can give.
Yes, as you know, it started by the doctors and joined lately by the politician and human rights defender who are in prison. Now almost all the prisoners in the Asri or dry dock prisons are on hunger strike. Many of these soldiers and the policemen who are in detention are joining the family, including their kids, are joining the hunger strike. At least 120 people tonight, among those people in hunger strike, have protested in front of Bahrain Mall, one of the biggest Bahrain shopping mall. The moment they have started their protest, they were attacked by tear gas, rubber bullet, and sound bomb. The situation is deteriorating as some of those doctors being transferred to the hospital because of the Khawaja, with news of Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja and Jalil Singh's health is being deteriorating due to this hunger strike. Kids and children, member of doctors' family are joining this hunger strike. It is a few days now. It is worrying the health condition of those people, but unfortunately, you are not in a government. You consider it as a civilized government, which consider the life of its own citizens, but Bahrain government is ignoring the request and the recommendation and the that is raised by all the human rights organizations in the past weeks and months. And I don't think that the Bahrain government will transfer their case
as they wanted, from the military court to the civil court. As you know, the reason of this protest, the hunger strike, is because they've been tried before a military court, where they think, everybody thinks, human rights organizations, all international human rights community think that civilian people should be tried before civilian court and not the military court. But Bahrain government, and because of the Saudi support, financial and political support, they think they could get away with anything they want to do. They think they could violate, they could commit crime against humanity, and nobody gonna talk to them as far as the Saudis behind them. This is what we are witnessing at this moment.
Well, Saeed Shahabi, recently some hopes were pinned on the International Human Rights Commission tasked with investigating the violence there. Please tell us what happened there. The latest, that his chairman was accused of prejudicing the outcome of some of the investigation, which, by the way, I'm sure you're well aware of, was a committee set up by the king.
Well, I think the world is keeping quiet about a tragedy that's unfolding and has been unfolding for several years. Now, in the past few months, we have seen how the situation has deteriorated so rapidly. What is making the situation more difficult and more tragic is the fact that Bahrain today is being ruled by the military. We know that last week the dictator himself has decreed that all the cases now, or many of the cases, especially those of the doctors, are going through military courts. Now, a military dictatorship run by a hereditary dictatorship, how could the world just keep quiet about it? Now, when the victims of state terrorism have gone to the International Criminal Court, they are still waiting the verdict and the view of those officials in the Ocampo camp. Locally, the ruling family has appointed their own commission, but this is a commission that is a lackey, that is a tool in the hands of the military dictatorship. So I don't understand how internationally respected individuals of this commission accept themselves to be exploited and utilized to this extent that its own chairman, the chairman of the Royal Commission, would come out and support the dictator whose sons have been implicated directly in the torture of our own people. Today, my heart is bleeding for those 120 or 150 people who are on hunger strike, especially Dr. Abdul Jais Singhais, who is disabled, and also Mr. Abdul Hadi Al-Khawaja, whose health have deteriorated rapidly. I think it is time that our people really take the struggle a step further to end this bloodshed by the military dictatorship and end this Saudi occupation of our country.
And along those lines, Nara Hashmi, not as disappointing, of course, we hear about the king's recent announcement of pardoning some protesters, yet we have this continual Saudi-backed crackdown that's persisting, and then we had the death of that 14-year-old boy, and then it puts into question, how can a parliamentary by-election take place on September 24th based on all these circumstances?
Well, I don't think it will happen because, first of all, the opposition, that they're not going to be joining this kind of election. It's nonsense. It's ridiculous. And all what's been happening in the pardoning, you know, that's the most amazing, funniest joke I've ever heard in my life. Pardoning, it's like the whoever commits a crime needs to pardon the victim. Now, let's go back to the real issues here. What's happening right now? See, the deployment of Saudi Arabia in Bahrain is not at all without a reason. First of all, sitting 20 miles off of Saudi Arabia's eastern coast, that makes it very important strategically, economically, and geopolitically. Now, if they leave it just like that without intervening, and it's like trying to defend their own country of what's happening in Bahrain, it's going to be it's nonsense to the Saudis. And let's not forget, Mr. Shahabi was saying something, how could the world community and how could the UN and just have a blind eye towards about what's happening? We all know who's the biggest ally to Saudis. It's the U.S. administration, no matter what, and definitely the babysitters of the Zionists. Now, let's say one thing, and we know that for a fact, that the U.S. administration, they have an agreement with the Saudis. You stay our biggest ally, you keep on buying our weapons, we keep on taking your oil, and we defend you in any way possible. And we turn a blind eye to anything that you would do, regardless of killing people, of torturing people, of what's happening in Bahrain. What's happening in Bahrain, it's simply an occupation. So what do you call that? What do you call it other than that? They intervened without no reason whatsoever. Even there's a princess who was on BBC not too long ago saying that, and she's from the Al Saud family, saying that the intervention by the Saudis into Bahrain was a faux pas. It shouldn't have happened. But you know what she had continued to say, that the United States and the West make mistakes. So the Saudis made a mistake as well. So what do we go? Do we go by taking what mistakes the West makes, and then we go we do what they do in mistakes? I wish we can go after them and dealing with democracy and human rights and not killing people and just killing them in cold-blooded and just what happened right now in Bahrain by killing this 14-year-old kid it only ignited the Bahrainis and the demonstrators, the peaceful, let me repeat that again, the peaceful demonstrators that's been happening, regardless, and nobody is batting an eye about what's happening. And while that, we hear Mr. Ban Ki-moon just killing us every single day, with other countries saying that, you know, they've been killing, they're supporting rebels, right, who's killing their own people in brutal kind of way, and not saying anything. Right. Well, so, let me bring in Nabeel Rajab to ask him. Nabeel Rajab, I mean, point blank, Saudi Arabia, you have them on the one hand as part of this GCC, Persian Gulf Cooperation Council. Then you have the UK and the US with its Fifth Fleet. On the other hand, by some accounts, a change in Bahrain, many are saying, is doomed not to happen because of these countries. My question to you, how far will these countries go to stop and crush the revolution in Bahrain?
Well, you have to take something into consideration. Any democracy in Bahrain will have an impact in Saudi Arabia. And democracy in Saudi Arabia is something that they don't want to see. Iraq is becoming democracy is a threat, which is not as close as Bahrain. Now, Bahrain, which is walking distance from Saudi, democracy is reaching that close distance. This is very dangerous to the Saudis. This is how they view it. From the other side, you have to take something also into consideration that we have realized in those revolutions in the Arab Spring, that the Saudi influence in some European countries and United States is more than the influence of those European countries or United States on Saudi and in the Gulf region. That's why we've seen how much Saudi could silence, the American could silence some European countries into saying anything or taking any strong decision onto the Bahrain situation. We have seen how much crime being
specific country and ignore a specific country. Unfortunately, we have realized democracy to the United States and to some European countries, it means only to those countries whom they have a problem with, but not to those dictators whom they have a good relation with, like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. See how much Saudi Arabia and Gulf countries come when the American president speaks and criticizes the situation in the Arab region when he talks about democracy and human rights and values and principles. Saudi Arabia is always ignored in his speech. Why? Although Saudi Arabia is one of the most human rights violators in the region, but you he's almost ignored by in his speech. Why? Because of the Saudi influence. Unfortunately, Saudi's influence is very strong in the United States. It's very strong in Europe. That's why they could silence those countries in criticizing Bahrain. That's why for many months people were killed. 1,000 people were fired, mosques being demolished, worshiping places being destroyed. People were arrested, systematic torture, villages being raided, houses being robbed by the army and the police, with complete silence from the Western and countries and United States. Unfortunately, this is something you have to take into consideration. But I know my people in Bahrain, and I know the young people here, when they started their uprising, when they started their revolution, they have not depended on the Americans, they have not depended on the Western powers, they have not depended on a neighboring country, they have depended on themselves, in the belief, and the justified belief that they deserve to have a democracy. They deserve to lead like any other European country that have the right to election, that have elected parliament, that they have elected government, that prime minister could be changed every 4 years. People live in equality, fair distribution of wealth, fair distribution of power. This is what our people fighting for. Mm-hmm. We are depending on ourselves. We are not depending. Unfortunately, yes, we try to get the help, political support, moral support from international community. If it comes, thank you very much.
Right.
If it doesn't come, it doesn't matter much. We know the complication of the international community. We know the interest. We know the influence. We know the economic influence. We know the American presence here. It is serving the dictators. But this is the situation that we have to deal with, and we are dealing with it.
Well, let's look at a piece of news about this Fifth Fleet, Saeed Shahabi, and that was that it surfaced recently that the U.S. and Bahrain secretly extended their military agreement in 2002, that the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet would be there until the year 2016. Now, what's so strange is that this deal that was up for renewal this month, but it was done for an extension in 2002 with Bush Jr. How do you explain this? An extension that was made in secret, given the fact that the duration of military agreements are always public information, and everybody thought that that was up for renewal for 2011.
Well, I think this is an indication of how much the United States is ready to go ahead with defending a military dictatorship. This is one thing. The other thing is that we are approaching the 9/11 attacks on New York and Washington in 2001. Now, this is a reminder to the world that the United States interests are not going to be served by the Saudi kingdom, because it is simply a place where terrorism, extremism, lack of democracy all contribute to disturb and to threaten the peace of the world. This is another dimension. The third dimension is that, yes, the United States may go ahead with renewing their military agreement to keep their forces in Bahrain for another 4 years or so. However, I am sure that the United States will have to rethink its policy of staying in Bahrain. I am sure that the military generals in Bahrain today, in the military facilities that are being occupied by the United States, are rethinking their strategy, especially that they are coming to the world and telling them that, look, we did not know that the Saudis are going to invade Bahrain. Of course, we know that is not true.
Well, we know that do they have a plan B? What is the plan B? I'm sure there's a plan B in place. Whether it's the United States by themselves, Saudi Arabia by themselves, or each cooperatively. What is plan B scenario coming from the United States point of view, in your opinion?
I think they have already started thinking of removing their military facilities, because at the end of the day, it's not just the land that they want. They want also peace for their own troops. I think they are aware that their presence in Bahrain is causing them a lot of embarrassment in their own country, inside the United States, that there are many voices of concern against this unholy alliance. They know that the blood of the martyrs of Bahrain, especially of Ali al-Sheikh, will continue to haunt their presence there. I think their plan B will be to remove the military facilities away from Bahrain, probably to redeploy them to the United Arab Emirates or even Qatar. But at the same time, they also are aware that they may not need those military facilities at all, given that they already have facilities in other GCC countries. I think their plan B should be to just leave the country, leave the will alone, and leave the Bahrainis to their own fate rather than continue supporting this military dictatorship. The Bahrainis are fed up, they are tired, they feel really disappointed by the attitude of both Washington and London towards what's going on inside Bahrain. Look, for a 14-year-old kid being killed on the Eid day, that is a travesty of all human rights values. Only yesterday, Amnesty International has expressed dismay that Bahrain would go and change and fabricate the news about the international body itself, about Amnesty International, saying something that they didn't say. I think this regime is desperate for news, for good news, desperate for support, and it seems to me that the West is still ready to offer dictatorships such support, despite the fact that these dictatorships are really threatening the peace of the whole, not only of the region, but also of the whole world.
And some are saying in an act of desperation, Nada Hashmi, in about 15 seconds or less, when a young woman's poetry is scaring the king, doesn't it mean that it's time up for Sheikh Hamad?
Yes, definitely. It's time up for Sheikh Hamad. Only, you see, let me just point one thing that is very important. In my opinion, I see that what happened with the Saudi intervention in Bahrain, that's a sign of weakness. So that's a sign of weakness and frightened really, because they're very afraid of the uncertainties and what's going to happen in if a regime change is going to happen. Not only them, but actually all the GCC countries and the West and of course, big brackets, the U.S. administration. So again, you were asking Mr. Shahabi for a plan B. The plan B is definitely, even if they have to create a civil war between Bahrainis or a huge sectarian gap, that will do it for sure. U.S., the Saudis, the GCC will not let them go. But I can say one thing: the Bahrainis, the demonstrators, are not going home. So they should, all the West and the Saudis should keep that in mind. They are there to stay. They will have a regime change. Only what's happening, it's going to make them even stronger. So the more killing they will do, the Bahrain, the regime, the more they're going to make them stronger. Okay, we're going to end it there. Thank you very much, Nada Hashmi. Nada Hashmi, political analyst there from Beirut. We had Saeed Shabi earlier from London, from the Bahraini Freedom Movement, and we had also president of the Bahraini Center for Human Rights, Nabeel Rajab. Thank you for watching this edition of the News Analysis. Do send us any questions or comments you may have at newsroom@presstv.ir. From Maqabata and the entire team, it's goodbye.